Welcome to the Director's Podium. I'm your host, Adam Christie. Our guest today is the host of the Habits series published by GIA and is the former director of bands at Wandale High School in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. He is a graduate of the New England Conservatory of Music. He currently serves as the conductor of the Charleston Wind Symphony. In 2010, he was elected to the prestigious American Bandmasters Association. You can check out his books and the books a part of his Habits series at habitsuniversal.com. Again, that's habitsuniversal.com. Please welcome Scott Rush. Scott, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Adam. I really appreciate the kind invitation to be with you today.
Scott, you wrote the Habits series, and I'd like to circle to that very core of the word habit. How would you define habit?
Well, that's a great question. You know, we've done this series since 2005, and I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that question. But for me, a habit is when knowledge, skill, culture, and purpose synergistically collide to create success through a pattern of repetition that results in a strong core value. And, you know, that word synergy means that the sum of the parts are greater than the individual parts themselves. So all those things kind of come together. And one of my favorite quotes from John Gordon is, creating culture of excellence is not just one thing, it's everything. Culture drives expectations and beliefs. Expectations and beliefs drive behaviors. Behaviors drive habits, and habits create the future. So if we want to create success in our future, we want to have great habits. And so that's where that whole idea of, you know, knowledge and skill and purpose and culture kind of collide to create that wonderful synergy.
Why do you think it is that good habits are very hard to keep up with, yet bad habits are very easy to keep doing?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think that anytime we try to establish a great habit, it requires great leadership. And so I agree with you. I think it's harder to actually create a great habit, and it's easier for us to fall into bad habits. So the whole idea of, like I said, the idea of leadership and the collaboration piece, to me, has a lot to do with this idea of creating a habit for success, because we want those habits of success to affect other people.
Habits of success. We'll pivot right off that to leadership. What is your definition of a leader?
A leader, to me, is selfless to the extent that he or she gives to others in a meaningful way. A leader should have character and a moral compass. And what I mean by that is, as opposed to, you know, a dictatorship or, you know, one-way direction. And a leader should understand the need to create a safe environment for collaboration where the intent is to serve other people, to help them create their maximum potential. To me, an effective leader creates connection through trusting cooperation, and then the idea of being vulnerable.
Would you say that being a teacher and being a leader are very similar?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that obviously to be a successful teacher, there has to be great leadership involved. And like I said, to me, that has more to do with the kind of culture you create. It's a collaborative process. And like I said, you know, as opposed to the dictatorship model, which is kind of one-way direction, I see it as almost being the pebble that hits the water that creates ripples. And that's our job, is to be the initiator of that.
What would you say has been your greatest challenge as a leader or conductor?
Wow. Probably my greatest challenge as a leader have been the two situations that I went into as a band director. The first situation that I went into, I followed a lady who had been there. She was kind of the matriarch of band directors, and she had been at the same school for 47 years. And talking about someone who change the culture for a community. I mean, she changed the culture. And I remember a situation, she brought a clarinet player into her office, and she was saying, I know that your mother would not approve. And then she said, wait a minute, I taught your grandmother, and I know that your grandmother wouldn't approve. But in that situation, the culture was in place. And the beauty of that was she and I had the opportunity to teach together for 3 years. So that was great because the transition was smooth, which was wonderful. The challenge in that situation was not culture, it was actually musical. And so there was lots of room for growth, and, musical potential. And so that was the challenge in the first situation. The second situation is when I went to Wando High School. The director who was there before me did a wonderful job musically and had the band at a really pretty high level of performance. And the challenge there was actually the culture piece. There was really an opportunity to make relationships, and there was certainly room for musical growth. But there was the challenge was building a nurturing culture, if you will. And, that was done through great student leadership, great relationships with the students, great feeders, like middle school feeders. And we were just able to create a culture and a community. And then what ended up happening with that was the program grew. So when I got there, we had about 98 students in the program, and it grew to about 290 students in the program.
Wow.
So over time. So it was both those situations were challenges in the sense that they were different situations, but required different types of leadership.
The second part to that question is, what is the toughest decision you've ever had to make as a leader?
I think the first tough decision that I really had to make as a leader was leaving Wando High School. I was there for 15 years. Every moment there was fantastic. I loved those students, and I actually underestimated what that would be like to leave the students. I missed the students terribly when I left there, but I felt like I moved to a director of fine and performing arts position in the school district, and I felt like that I could exponentially help more students and teachers by doing that. And, having written the Habit series, I felt like that was a wonderful bridge. And it turned out that was true. Like what I really loved doing as a director of fine and performing arts was like being a teacher coach. So I really like that. And I use some of our habit synergy model is knowledge, effective communication, physical energy, musicianship, and who you are as a music educator. And I was really able to use that kind of as a coaching model when I became a director of fine and performing arts.
Let's talk about your finest moment. What would you say was your finest moment as a leader?
Wow. I think if you seek to lead others, I don't think that you can define like a finest moment. I think the value of a leader is measured by the success of the people you lead. And so if the entire community of people feel safe and they feel loved and cared for, then that's the first step in creating, a world-class culture. I can tell you that building a culture where people feel valued and loved is really important to me. That whole idea, they don't care how much you know till they know how much you care, or you must connect before you can correct. My experience has been the music making is actually done with more depth and meaning when the culture is in place. When the person who's in front of the group, maybe be driven by certain things, but they don't really care for the students, there's a barrier there where you can only go so far. But when the teacher leader is vulnerable and creates an environment where students, feel loved and cared for, then I think, magic happens. One of the things we had at Wando High School, when we had the growth in the program, people would ask me, why, how do you attribute the retention rate and the growth in the program? And I would say to them, well, I think it was because of a high level of music making. I said, but maybe more importantly, we had something called freshman interviews. And every Wednesday afternoon, we would, if they were new to the program, meaning they were like freshmen or they were, moved in new to the program, we would do freshman interviews and about 15 minutes per student. And I would ask them all these questions like, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? What's the best vacation you've ever taken with your family? Because they would tell me something about their family. Who's your favorite musical artist? But anyway, I'd ask them all these questions. But the very first thing I would say to them when they would come in for the interviews, I would say, if we're going to spend the next 4 years together, I really want to get to know you. And then my words and actions had to bear that out. And so, I think that anything that we can do like that, whether we're doing an all about me assignment or the freshman interview, somebody told me the other day, they do a movie night regularly in their program, which I think is really cool. I think, like I said, when you build the right kind of culture and you kind of say to students, that you believe in their success, then I think then the music making can have depth and meaning. And I think, it's as I always say, we're in the music business and the people business. It's not either or, it's and.
So you were at one school where you worked very hard to build up the performance part of it, and another where you worked very hard to build up the culture part of it. What do you think is harder, changing a culture in a school or changing the way that they perform?
I think they're both difficult because there's so many things about both that have to marry each other. In the situation, well, really in both situations, you can't pull students towards anything. You have to create ownership. And when you create ownership, sometimes you have to create musical ownership, and sometimes you have to create culture ownership. And there's nothing wrong in the musical ownership idea to say, we're going to have high standards in this program, and I believe with all my heart that you can reach those high standards. And then you have to have a methodology for knowing how to get students from point A to point B musically. And then, ultimately, obviously, we want all students to fall in love with and resonate with music. So that's really our overall and our overarching goal, is to get students to fall in love with music. The other side of that is you may have a situation where the degree of music making is high and you can get to that place, but sometimes there's a disconnect. And, when that happens, for instance, you could have a high degree of music making, but you could also have a really high degree of burnout, student burnout and teacher burnout. So that's where the culture piece comes in. It really is a balancing act. And I think they're both difficult, but I think they also require different skills in terms of being a change agent.
So going through the programs that you had, how did you use leadership in those?
Here's an interesting thing about this question. We used, when I was at Wando High School, really at both programs, we used what I now consider to be somewhat of an old model. And that is, we use the 10-80-10 principle, which is kind of a business model, where there's 10% positive leaders, 80% followers, and 10% negative leaders. And we would give the student leadership team a lot of training, and it was really important. And I'm not saying it's a bad model, because it's not. I just believe that we've gotten to a place where we want to lead all students. And, it kind of goes back to you can't lead others till you lead yourself, right? And so, Tim Lotzenheiser and I wrote a book called Pathway to Success. And we started with two statements. The first one was, all means all. And literally what we meant by that was the idea that you could have a situation where you train the top 10% and then go, well, what about the others, right? When are we going to reach the other students? And so if you literally start with fundamentals or habits, so like in Pathway to Success, we started with communication, attitude, honesty, integrity, trust, self-discipline, emotional health, goal setting, relationships, cooperation, selflessness, loyalty, and creating a moonshot. Well, if you think about those things, every student can move up that, metaphorical mountain, but the reality is that some of them may only move up a few levels. And then as they get older, they move up a few more levels. And the other part of that is Tim and I felt like in that model that it was really important to talk about emotional health. And what I mean by that, not the idea, emotional health basically has to do with how we react to things. And so not like, mental illness. We're not equipped to handle things like that. But as far as emotional health is concerned, get students to really connect with their own emotions and how they relate to things. So it was really important for, all students to do that. So we started with this model, the 10-80-10, and we spent lots of years, training the leaders. But the reality is, I think in today's world, I really think that, we need to train every student. And that doesn't mean, let's see how I can do this. We train all students to create connection through trust and cooperation. And we encourage students to take ownership, and we passionately strive to make a difference in their lives. We train the leaders, that top 10%, to perpetuate creating connection through trust and cooperation and relationship building. And the synergy builds culture and purpose, both musically and personally. So like never before has it been more evident that you don't have to have a title to lead, if that makes sense. We also need those rock star leaders to create that pathway towards success and encourage them to help everyone take ownership of the program. I hope that makes sense. But
I am interested in, you talked about a moonshot, creating a moonshot. What do you mean by that?
So my experience has been that if you just give young people permission to dream big, that they can far exceed what we think is possible if we just give them that opportunity. And so the very top level of our Pathway to Success model that Tim and I use is a culture of excellence. But just above that is the idea of creating a moonshot. So I'll give you a couple of examples of moonshots. There was a young lady named Veronica Leahy who was in the Charlotte area. And she wanted to create an organization called Melodic Minors. And she went to some folks at her school and said, we want to create this idea of playing concerts, out in the community and doing some outreach things. And the people told her that it was too lofty. It was just too lofty. And so she and some of her friends, when she was in the 10th grade, decided to start a nonprofit organization, and they called it Melodic Minors. And they played in children's homes, and they did sock hops for the old folks home, and they played in malls, and they went into children's hospitals and had musical petting zoos and all kinds of things. Another example is when I was at Wando High School, I used to tell the students they would do a leadership project, like a service project, and they had to do it individually. They couldn't do it together. Well, these two young men came into my office one day and they said, "We want to talk to you about our leadership project." And I said, "Do y'all want to do this together?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "Nope. The wording in the application says you have to do it each individually." And one of the young men said, "Hear us out." I said, "Okay." And he said, "I'm a senior. He's a junior. If we do this together, we can perpetuate this idea." And I said, "All right, tell me the idea." And he said, "We'd like to start something called Music Mentors. We'd like to take our all-state students over to one of the middle schools and provide free private lessons for students who can otherwise not, afford it or not maybe taking private lessons. And we'd like to raise money to provide an instrument for students. If there's a student who couldn't afford, to purchase an instrument, we want to reward a student who's kind of got lots of potential." And I just thought it was a great idea. So the whole idea of creating a moonshot is just getting students to think outside of the box, maybe even outside of their programs, and to do something meaningful.
Scott, let's talk a little bit about your books. You wrote the Habits series. You're, the founder of that. And I'm wondering, I know this is a deep question, but what would you say to the question of what do you think your books offer to the world?
That is a big, deep question. There are 14 books in the series, and it's like having multiple children. They all have different personalities, and they kind of all have a different purpose. So I'll start by sharing with you our we call it our Habits Team mission statement, and it actually starts with the words "one team," and it's our mission is to provide music teachers and students valuable resources that help create a collaborative environment for music making and to connect teachers and students in a significant way through music, love, passion, vision, and purpose. So we have 3 different types of books in the series. The first one is what we call how-to books. They're books for directors, and the goal is to kind of put tools in teachers' toolboxes. And a lot of times we'll have teachers who will tell us that they keep their book open on their desk, or they keep it, available to them because they want to know, teaching strategies for what to teach and how to teach it. And so our how-to books are things like Habits of Successful Band Director, Habits of a Successful Middle School Band Director, The Evolution of a Successful Band Director, which is a workbook type resource, and then Habits of Significant Band Director. And then we also have, for strings, we have Habits of Successful Orchestra Director, and for choir, we have Habits of Successful Choir Director. So those are kind of our how-to books. The second category that we have are method books. And we have 3 band method books. They're really designed to take what I call the components of playing, which is timing, tuning, tone, technique, balance, balloon, articulations, dynamics, phrasing, musicianship, accuracy, clarity. You could just add all those words to take the components of playing and give teachers a resource to go, here's how you teach these things. And for the teachers to be able to say to students the why behind, teaching these things. Because like I said earlier, ultimately we want students to fall in love with music and music making. So we have 3 band method books. We have Habits of Successful Beginner Band Musician, which is our newest beginner band method book. We have Habits of Successful Musician and Habits of a Successful Middle School Musician. And then we have, for strings, we have 2 method books. We have Habits of Successful Middle Level String Musician and Habits of Successful String Musician. And then for choir, we have a wonderful method book called Habits of Successful Choral Musician. And then the third category that we have for our books are what we call basically culture building books. So, the book that I said that Tim and I did, which is Pathway to Success, Habits for Creating a Culture of Excellence in Band, Choir, and Orchestra. And then Jeremy Lane and I did a book called Quality of Life Habits for a Successful Band Director. But, ultimately, we hope our resources make a difference in the lives of students and teachers, musically and personally.
What do you think is the biggest leadership myth that you've ever heard?
Wow. There are 2 that jump out to me. The first one is that you must have a title to lead. We were talking about that earlier. This kind of goes back to the idea that, we have the opportunity to make a decision when we wake up in the morning, whether we want to make a difference. We have the opportunity to be positive. We have the opportunity to make up our bed. We have the opportunity to make one good decision after the other. And we have the choices for our attitude and our outlook and how we respond to things. So being really intentional about being a good leader of self is, how we make a difference. So, you don't have to have a title to lead. And then the other thing, I guess the other myth to me is that managers are good leaders. You can be a good manager, but sometimes good managers create efficient systems, but they don't create effective cultures. And one of my favorite quotes is culture trumps strategy every time. And so, where good management can be a positive skill, it's better to create a culture that's collaborative where it doesn't matter who gets the credit. And it goes back to that whole trusting, cooperation, selflessness thing.
What was your experience like, and what advice do you have for dealing with administrators or administration?
I feel like I have a unique perspective about this because, I was in the trenches for 22 years. And then I was a music administrator for 6 years. I really think every teacher should get the opportunity to serve in some type of administrative role, even if they could just do it, teleport themselves just for a little while and do it and then come back to the classroom. Because you really do see things from a completely different perspective. You see things globally and you get information in that you would not have had otherwise. You also get a chance to see that there are many administrators who don't necessarily resonate with arts, don't necessarily resonate with arts education. That's why I think it's really important for school districts to have, an arts administrator who can clearly articulate the value of, arts education on all levels. But as far as kind of dealing with administrators, I think this whole thing, they don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. I think that's true with adults too. If you just build a relationship where the relationship's built on always needing something, that's not always, the best type of relationship. It's a very needy relationship. And so, I found that it was really important to just build relationships with my administrators. I had the most amazing principal when I was at Wando High School, Lucy Beckham. Matter of fact, she was National Principal of the Year in 2011. And one of the things that was so amazing about her was that she knew how to convey excellence to every member of the team. Nothing was more important than anything else in the school. And she just knew how to create a culture of excellence, both in terms of building relationships with people, but also just saying, I believe that what you do is important. And so I think, one of the things that what happened with Lucy and I was every time we met, we'd probably spend the first 7 or 8 minutes in her office talking about her family. And, my wife and I were friends with her daughter and son-in-law and son, and we knew their grandkids, we knew her grandkids and knew their kids. And we'd spend time talking about family first. And it really makes a difference, to build a relationship with your administration. And so that if I had to give advice for someone, it would be, don't put yourself in a situation where the only time you go to see your administration is when you need something. Truly go out of your way to build those relationships, and the rest will take care of itself.
Do you feel that your time as filling in for them in an administrator role or your time as a fine arts director, do you feel like that global perspective changed the way your relationship was with your administrators?
Yeah, I really do. I think, it was really interesting when I went to the director of fine and performing arts position. You're basically changing your environment from a predominantly student and staff culture of people that you had spent lots of time building great relationships with to just being around adults. And it was really important, I thought, to make relationships with people. And interestingly enough, I found that it was harder to build, let's say it this way, I had to work harder to build authentic relationships with the adults. But it was worth the time to do that. And especially in those situations, if you can be a great listener and really listen to what other people have to say and not necessarily try to solve all the problems, but just be a great listener, that collectively you can form a team where it will get done.
Well, Scott, let's talk a little bit about your weaknesses, if you're willing to talk about it. What were your weaknesses and how did you compensate for those?
I could probably talk for days about my weaknesses, but I think there's several that kind of stand out for me in terms of things that I had to work through. The first one was, the idea of just being married to the job and getting that whole quality of life thing out of kilter. I told you that Jeremy Lane and I wrote this book together called Quality of Life Issues, for band directors. And that really came out of a discussion that Jeremy and I had where I said to him, hey, I'm the poster child for why this book needs to be written. And it was actually going through that process of presenting workshops and kind of acknowledging, myself that, hey, I need to put some strategies, some action steps and some strategies in place to kind of balance the scales, so that, the work-life balance was there. But I was definitely at a place, this was true when I was single and married. And, just the idea of keeping that work-life balance, that was certainly a weakness. And it was something that I was able to work through over time. And, it involves a lot of communication with your spouse and, making some strategic decisions at school. So that was certainly one. The other thing that I would say that sticks out to me that I had to work through was I'm not a naturally charismatic person. Even though, when I get in front of students, I usually, have a lot more energy kind of thing, but I'm not naturally charismatic. And so early in my career, I remember, kind of fluctuating between going, is my role there to try to be someone else or look up to somebody else? And, what I learned through the process was that I really needed to be myself. And that I found that my definition of charisma, if you want to put it that way, of charisma, was saying to students, I love and care about you. And, that my words and actions kind of bear that out. Number two, that, I believe in their success. I talked about this a little bit earlier. It also means that you can communicate to students that, you have high standards and expectations, but you believe in your heart that they're going to reach those high standards. You can give students, pretty high bars. And my experience has been they'll break through the glass ceiling and go up there and get it. And then the other thing is just the idea of creating a safe environment, being vulnerable to the students, and creating an environment where creativity, imagination, and wonderment are fostered. So I found out for myself that if I was true to myself, and that I led with compassion and building a culture and a really high standard for high-level music making, that all those things for me came under my definition of charisma. So those are two things that, in my career, the quality of life piece and trying to figure out the charisma piece, those are two things that are vivid to me, that were weaknesses that I felt like that I worked through.
As we close out our time together, Scott, can you tell us what would be your closing encouragement or advice for our listeners?
Well, I think right now with everything happening with COVID-19, I'm teaching a class right now. Actually, I just finished teaching a class at Vandercook, and an online class. And, everybody's in a different place, but everybody is stressed with the teaching environment right now. My wife's an elementary music teacher. She's teaching 12 Zoom classes a day. And everybody's just, kind of, had to reinvent the wheel to some extent. And the whole idea that, our whole world has just kind of been turned upside down. So my words of encouragement are actually two things. One is that I think it's going to be absolutely pure joy when we get back together and things get back to normal. I conduct an adult ensemble, and some of the members even of the adult group have reached out to me and said, we can't wait to get back together to make music. I think we're going to value every second of it. The other thing that I think we've learned some things during COVID-19 where we're actually going to take some things that we wouldn't have normally done that we've applied like this semester. We're going to keep those things going. And I think a lot of people have taken the opportunity to teach some things that maybe they wouldn't have taught otherwise, whether that was conducting or a lot of rhythm vocabulary or, solo repertoire or chamber ensembles or, any number of things. I think we've learned some things, new uses of technology. We've learned some things that I think as we move forward are just going to enhance, everything that we do in the classroom. So I think just the opportunity to take what we've been faced with and turn it into something joyous, because I really do think it's going to be something that we're going to truly value when we get to the other side.
Scott, can you also tell our listeners where they can connect with you or where they can find your books and materials?
So the best way to reach me individually is through my email address, which is srush0, the number 0, at yahoo.com. They can also reach me through habitsofsuccess.com. And they can also reach me through habitsuniversal.com. And for our resources, they can go to giamusic.com and punch in anything in the habit series in the search engine and it'll pop up.
Now, usually we have a thing called the curtain call that we put on our website. It's kind of our time where we get to know our guest a little bit more without necessarily talking about leadership or teaching or anything like that. But on this episode, we are actually going to include it in today's episode. So you get a feel for what that's like. And if you see something you like and you're like, I wonder what some other guests would have said for various questions like that, you can go to our website, thedirectorspodium.com. So let's jump right in here. Scott, can you tell us, you jump in the car, you're going to drive somewhere. What are you listening to?
Great question. It really could be anything, but some days it's going to be I'll tell you a quick story. I got in my car the other day. I turned on the car and all of a sudden the Rachmaninoff second piano concerto was on. And so it was near the end of the first movement. And I was like, oh, fantastic. The second movement's coming on. It's just a slow, beautiful movement. And so I started driving and I was just totally immersed in the music. And I realized after about 15 minutes, I was supposed to be driving this way to a school and I was just driving home. I don't know why I was driving home, but I was just driving home because I just totally got lost in the music. So it could be anything from, Mahler symphonies to anything in the classical repertoire. It could be, some of my favorite, band composers. It could be Earth, Wind and Fire. It could be Snarky Puppy. It could be, the Strauss Serenade or the Mozart Grand Partita. Any number of things.
Okay, so let's talk about your kids a little bit. What are they like? Are they big lovers of music?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier that my wife's an elementary music teacher. My son Thomas is in the 10th grade. He is a French horn player, and one of the great things about Thomas is that he and I we're discovering music together, which is wonderful. He'll come to the car and he'll plug in his phone and he'll have whatever his newest piece that he's listening to. And I love just the collaboration of that. Tell you a quick story about that. When he was in the 7th grade, we took him to hear Mahler Symphony No. 1 and went to the orchestra concert. And we got home that night and my wife and I were sitting on the bed. And all of a sudden, Thomas comes running through into the bedroom and he goes, "Dad, guess what?" I said, "What, Thomas?" He goes, "Did you know there's a Mahler 2?" Like it was a sequel to a movie or something. And so I said, "Yeah, you keep doing some digging there. You'll find a few more symphonies than just 2." So he's our horn player, and he really loves music. Caroline is our dancer. Matter of fact, last night we went to a performance. She was Clara in the Nutcracker, and she also plays oboe. So Thomas in the 10th grade, Caroline's in the 5th grade.
So did you face that fear of, what if they don't love music the way I do?
I'm really open to the idea that they, be themselves and discover various things on their own. I don't know, though, how they could grow up in this household with me as their dad and their mom as an elementary music teacher, without loving music, because they're around it all the time. But, I don't know, what their plans are as they move forward. Thomas has got several things that he's looking at for college, and they're very different ideas. And I support them kind of being themselves, but I do want them to just, love and resonate with music. And I think, so far they have shown that. And, Caroline the other day was singing The Planets, and she and I had no discussion about it whatsoever. She was just singing it.
So we had an interview with Frank Battisti this past episode, and he is a gem. Love Frank Battisti. Of course, Frank was your conductor at the New England Conservatory of Music. And so one of the questions that he asked was something that I'm going to throw your way. He said, do you think that conductors should have political skills?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think it depends on how you define the word political. How do you define the word political?
I think the intent of the question was dealing with politics and, politics of everything that gets in the way of us trying to do music and whatnot. Or I guess he could be referring to politics outside, being an advocate for the arts or advocate for what we do. Not quite sure, but what would be your response to either way you would take that?
Well, I think first and foremost, and I know, let me say this first. Frank Battisti is a gem, and he and I are actually writing a book together right now. And I can't tell you how much joy that brings my heart. Just the idea that we collaborated, 30 plus years ago, as him being my mentor and collaborating musically, and for things to come back full circle and be able to collaborate. But what we're collaborating on is the idea of music making. And it is certainly our job to be music in the eyes of our students, and to foster their imagination and creativity and wonderment and love for expression. So in that sense, if I think that our job is to create that type of environment. And I don't, I will say this, the word politics and being political is really interesting right now in our world. Things are divisive, and in some ways they're kind of upside down, and it doesn't matter, which side you're on. Things are crazy. And I think that our job is, when we create a lab for music making, that lab for music making also be a safe haven. And when we create a lab for music making, we create that safe haven. Students want to be a part of that. And to be quite honest with you, parents want their children to be a part of that. They want to say, I want my child to do that. And so I think in that sense, our job is to create that environment. And we certainly don't need Washington to help us do that. Now, if you're asking political in terms of being an advocate for the arts, I think that's a little bit different question. And I do think that we need to be passionate about arts in our society and what it will do for young people and what it will do for our society.
Scott, if you wouldn't have been a conductor, and you had to choose something that was totally different and out of the music realm at all, what do you think you would have gone into?
Well, obviously play in the NBA. So now I'm just kidding. That's a really interesting question. And the only way I can answer that is to say that there was a time in my life where marine biology was really fascinating to me. And I'm still, we live near the coast and we spend time, we spend time at the ocean and all that. But I don't, from a very, very early age, my brother and sister both played guitar. I started playing ukulele when I was 4. And I went to my first concert when I was really young, my first band concert when I was really young. Went to my first orchestra concert when I was 12, and I'd already started playing horn. And David Kim, who's the concert master of the Philadelphia Orchestra now, he was 12 also, and he played a concerto with the orchestra. And I remember going to that concert, hearing David Kim play a concerto at age 12, going, I need to go home and practice. And so from a very early age, and my dad always had music in the house. I just remember from a very early age feeling like that, it was what I wanted to do. And then I started taking private lessons from Robert Prusen, who taught at the University of South Carolina. And he was just one of those people that was an absolute rock in my life. And he taught me so much. So I don't even know how to answer that question other than the fact that I think things happen because they're supposed to, and they started pretty early for me.
And I know no other way to end this interview than to ask you this question. What is your favorite sweet? Like, if you're going to eat something and junk out on something, what's your favorite thing to eat that would be a sweet food?
Okay, that's really easy for me, actually. It's chocolate chip cookies. My first job, there was a certain time in the morning when the ladies in the cafeteria would do these Otis Spunkmeyer chocolate chip cookies. And I already like, chocolate chip cookies, but they would do these chocolate chip cookies. And the band room was close enough to the cafeteria that when they started making the cookies, I could smell it. And we just got this routine down where if they didn't bring me a fresh chocolate chip cookie by a certain time, I would send a student to get one. And so it probably was not healthy at all, but there were years, literally years, where I ate a chocolate chip cookie every day of the school day, every day of the week of the school day. I love chocolate and love chocolate chip cookies. Matter of fact, Scott Lang did a book, and I was in one of the chapters, and the title of the chapter was Leonardo da Vinci and the Chocolate Chip Cookie. He came up with that title, but it was spot on. Yeah, I love chocolate chip cookies.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Scott. And thank you for listening and watching. We hope that this has been an enjoyable time for you. If you'd like to find out more from us or see more episodes, you could go to our website at thedirectorspodium.com, or you could go to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram and find out more from us from there. Don't forget this week, everyone, to take some time to rest and to rejuvenate, because you deserve it. You need to do that. And we hope that we provided you some inspiration to continue doing the vital work it is that you do.